It's the situation that there are 2 U.S. Marshals who are now in pursuit of me. These U.S. Marshals want to arrest me for participating in the raid against Harper's Ferry, Virginia. As you all know and have read, on October 16, 1859, a small band of men staged an attack upon Harper's Ferry, Virginia. This attack was led by Captain John Brown with the idea that he would seize the armaments, give them to the slaves, and the slaves would be motivated, inspired to revolt against the system that has kept them down for generations. John Brown had asked me personally to lead this insurrection. I told John Brown that the plan to attack the U.S. arsenal was a plan that would blow up in his face. I told John Brown that it was like a powder keg. It would blow up all around him. And indeed, John Brown was caught with his men. And John Brown was hung until dead. In the moments before his execution, the men who wanted to end his life for treason asked him if he had any final words. And John Brown spoke without a moment's hesitation, looking them directly in the face. I do believe that the sins of this country are so great that they cannot be purged except they be washed in blood. That was his final statement about his life's purpose. And John Brown has become a premonition that thousands of men will lay down their lives to defeat the God-forsaken system of slavery. And I too, Frederick Douglass, I too have become a premonition. You out there, what do you think it is that the slave master hates more than anything else in the world? He hates for a slave, a former slave such as myself, to steal himself away, to steal his own natural freedom away from a man who supposedly owns this body and this man and this soul. The old spirituals say, steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. I don't got long to stay here. That was a code that meant we were escaping from slavery. I stole myself away from slavery, and I became a free man in that free air of the North. But the slave master hates to hear what I say about slavery, because I speak vehemently against the slave system. The slave master, all of them want you to believe that black people are happy and content being slaves. They like to make you believe that people love picking cotton, and they love, singing songs and hanging out and joking with each other, that we have to protect these people. But I tell the truth of slavery. No man, woman, or child wants to be a slave or pursues to be a slave. That is not their natural endowment. But the slave masters really, really, really hate what I have to say now. In order for a man to enslave another human being, he has to defeat that man's humanity. He has to strive day and night to destroy that man's right to freedom and to the natural liberty of his humanity. And that is what the slave masters hate more than anything else in the world. Because when you pursue the destruction of another man's humanity, you have no choice but to destroy your very own. Because we as human beings are bound to each other as natural citizens of brotherhood. The slave master doesn't like to hear that song of freedom. When I was a child, a young boy, I did not know I was a slave. My early memories are of my grandmother Betsy. I can remember her with her waist deep in the water. And she would have these nets that she threw out into the water. She threw them out. They called it seine hauling. She threw them out into the water. These vast spaces of water on the river. They called it seine hauling. She was a famous fishing woman in those parts. She threw her nets out over the water, and she would sing, "The waters of Jordan are flowing to Zion, flowing home to my Lord. The waters of Jordan are flowing to Zion." That was my grandma Betsy. That was like a lullaby to me, a song that I will never forget. And my grandma Betsy, she was a famous planting woman too. They say that no seed would go into the ground unless Grandma Betsy's hands had blessed those seeds, because her hands were magic. Her hands touched the seeds and they would sprout and grow. So all of the farmers from miles around would hire her to touch those seeds, to bless those seeds. She would pray over those seeds. She'd keep them warm in the wintertime, and everything would sprout and grow in Grandma Betsy's hands. I did not know I was a slave. But one day, Grandma Betsy come to me and she say, "Hey Fred, you see the plantation we live on here? The land that stretches for miles and miles, and the little hut I live in, and you share with me, and all the youngins that I take care of, and you, and me. Well, we belong to old Massa." I suppose she was telling me something. Who was old Massa? I thought she was talking about God, old Master of the universe. But no, that's not what she was talking about. "Fred," she says to me, just a week later, "I'm going to take you to the main plantation so you can meet your kinfolk. There's youngins in your family you've never met. I want you to meet them, all of them." And so we walked about maybe 12, 16 miles toward the main plantation. And on the way, I thought I saw the most dangerous creatures that ever existed in the forest. You know, a child has imaginations that run away with themselves. You've heard of that expression, haven't you? "Grandma, there's a lion. There's a lion over there, Grandma." She said, "No, Fred, that ain't no lion. It's just a big old tree stump that's been pulled up out of the ground and it looks like a lion. Come on, let me show you." "No, Grandma, it's a real lion." But when I got there, she showed me that my imagination indeed had run away with itself. "Grandma, I'm scared, Grandma. There ain't no lions out here, boy. I'm scared, Grandma. Pick me up." So Grandma picked me up and put me on her shoulders. Now you wouldn't know that my grandma was an older woman, except if you notice the white hairs dangling down from her scarf. But she was a fit woman, very sturdy, and she walked like a queen. And she carried me, a big old boy, on her shoulders, maybe a good 2 or 3 miles. Can you believe that? A 70-year-old woman carrying a boy as big as me? "Grandma, I see the plantation, Grandma. I feel good now." She said, "You should feel good. I just carried you for 4 miles. "Grandma, who are all those people out there, Grandma?" "Why, that's your sister Liza. That's your cousin Jethro. There's your brother Perry. And each and every one of them is a cousin or something like a second cousin. Each one of them is your kinfolk." And I saw the lights of children just like the young people I see sitting in this audience today, light-skinned ones and dark-skinned ones. all the colors of the rainbow, and each and every one of them was my people. Go play with them, Fred, she said. You must be tired of hanging around my old petticoats. Go play with them. Grandma, they're wild. Look at them. Those children were indeed kind of wild. I saw a young boy running on his hands faster than I could run on my feet. And then I saw two other big boys throwing a little one up in the air like a big ball. It just went, woo! And he caught it just like a big ball. I said, these are wild children, Grandma. I've never played like that before. Go play with them, Fred. Might toughen you up. Well, she convinced me to go play with these youngins. Indeed, I was trying to play with them. I saw a young man throwing an axe up against the wall. He threw it straight right into the wall, right dead center of a big, big bullseye. Have you ever seen anybody throw an axe 30 feet across a room into the backside of a barn and hit it straight into a bullseye? Well, these young men could do it. As I was watching all these goings on, one of my cousins, he comes skipping, he comes and says, Fred, your grandmama is gone. What do you mean my grandmama is gone? She's gone. So I went to find my grandma. Grandma, where is your grandma? Grandma, where are you? Where's my grandma? My brother Perry, he come up behind me and says, Fred, you see this peach and this pear? I want you to have it. I don't want no peach and pear. I want my grandma. Well, Grandma, you know, if she doesn't want to be found, she ain't going to be found. And she had to bring you here just like she brought all these children. She raised all of these children here. You see them. But your time has come. Because you and me, we belong to old Massa. We are slaves. And that's the first time I ever realized what a slave was. That they could take from me, my grandma, or make her leave me alone with them. I cried right there where I stood, and my brother Perry tried to give me the peach and pear, and I threw it as far as I could. I want my grandma! On this plantation, I was taken to the kitchen. And Aunt Katie was the woman who ran that kitchen. She was I guess you could say, a task mistress, so to speak. She ran a very hard kitchen. She made the youngins stick to a certain discipline, and she took a very, very, very bad liking to me. She disliked me immensely, and I do not know why to this very day, but she would come up to me and said, you better get that look out of your face. Nobody cares what you think or how you feel. You gotta toe the line, youngin'. You gotta be like everybody else. So she probably thought I had a feeling of superiority. But one day, Aunt Katie, she was cooking up a big, big loaf of cornbread, and she cut it up into 16 pieces. Now there were 16 boys living in that kitchen. A small little kitchen, no bigger than half this stage here. And we slept in that kitchen, and we ate in that kitchen, and on certain mornings, we would have to rush to the food and get it and put it in our mouths. They served a big pot of cornmeal, just like it was slop that they would give to the pigs. We had to rush and eat it, like that. And so the boys would constantly push me out of the way. And constantly I was hungry. But this particular day, it was after breakfast. It was toward the noonday. And she had this big loaf of cornbread that she cut up in 16 pieces. And she gave each one of the boys a nice, big, succulent piece of cornbread. And my mouth was watering because I hardly ate anything all morning. When she got to me, she looked at the cornbread, and she walked out with it, right out into the yard. I said, ma'am, are you gonna give me my cornbread? She looked around at me and she says, I hope you starve. And she went out there and she started throwing the pieces of my cornbread to all the roosters and the chickens that were out there in the yard. Now those roosters and those chickens, they were mean. They were hungry too. So I wasn't about to get my cornbread by fighting with those roosters. I went out in the back with my stomach tight as a knot. And I did cry like a fine fellow. That night, I decided the hunger was too great. And as the sun was setting, and people were bedding down. I found myself a corn kernel in one of the pantries, and maybe 3 or 4 corn kernels, and I went over to the stove, the hot stove, and put them in the coals so that they could get hot. And I was waiting to see if anybody was going to see me eat. You know, when that woman makes it a judgment on you, that you don't deserve to eat, you know, she's going to beat you if you try to eat. And so I got the corn kernels out. They were really hot, nice, hot, steaming hot. I was getting ready to put them in my mouth, and the door opened, and I thought she was coming to beat me, and I was getting ready to really shove them in my mouth and dare her to beat me. But it wasn't on Katie. It was somebody I hadn't seen in a long time. Somebody that I haven't even told you about. When I tell you who it is, you're going to wonder why I haven't told you about it. Do you know who it is? My mother? It was my mother. My very own mother. My mother, Harriet. And you know why I never told you about Harriet? Because she was farmed out. Just like her other 4 sisters, she was farmed out to other plantations. She was owned by this plantation, but they kind of lent her out to all the others. She had to walk about 12 miles to see me that day. And she had to be back at her own plantation first thing in the morning. But there she was, smiling at me and said, "Fred, what's the matter with you, child? You look like death warmed over. You look sickly." And I told her what Aunt Katie had said to me, and that she didn't feed me today. Aunt Katie told me that she hoped I would starve. My mother, the fire and the anger in her face rose to a high pitch. And she walked into Aunt Katie's room, even though she might have been asleep. And I heard my mother give Aunt Katie a report, the likes of which your ears would fall off if I were to tell you the exact words that she said to Aunt Katie. Something to the extent, "Don't you ever let me see you doing this to my son again. If I hear about it, I will take some really, really hard things and put upon your head. And if I was to die tonight," she said, "I would come back and I would haunt you." And so my mother gave Aunt Katie this report, and Aunt Katie had the wind knocked out of her. And my mother came back to me, and she sat me down on her lap after cooking me a whole dish of gingerbread, and after finding some warm milk to give me. She sat me on her lap, and she fed me, and I fell asleep in my mother's arms. I'll always remember my mother coming to rescue me from the jaws of the lion. I'll always remember that my mother loved me that much, and she would walk 12 miles here and back. When I woke up that morning, she was gone. I'll always remember my mother. But you know, I told you that Aunt Katie had a special dislike for me. But Miss Lucretia, the mistress of the whole plantation, the white lady, who was the daughter of my master, she took a special liking to me. And Miss Lucretia came to my aid countless times, especially when boys were beating up on me. She would stop them, or she would hold the wounds that I had from being hit with an axe. "Come here, son, what's the matter?" "Oh, you're bleeding." She would hold my wound and put salve on it and put bandages on it. And I realized that it was Aunt Katie's meanness that hurt more than anything else. She could starve me, she could beat me, but it was her meanness that broke my spirit. And Miss Lucretia, not only did she take a special liking to me, but she took a special interest in my future. And she decided to send me to Baltimore. And she said, "When you get to Baltimore, you will learn a new trade. You will work with my brother-in-law's business on the shipping industry, and you won't be working here as a slave hand here on this plantation. And so Miss Lucretia sent me to Baltimore, and my life would change again. Constantly my fate was changing. When I got to Baltimore, I knocked on the door. And I put my face down, my eyes down to the ground, because I was not supposed to look at a white person directly in the face. Put my eyes down. But the lady, Miss Sophia, who came to that door, she lifted my face up, and I looked her straight in the eyes, and she said, "Don't look down, son, because you are a child of God. You have beautiful eyes. There's no reason to look down. When you are full of the grace of God, the Spirit belongs to everybody. We're all here together. Don't look down." I thought I was looking into the eyes of an angel. And she took me into her home, and she gave me and fed me, gave me sustenance, and she told me things, and had me sit right next to her son when she was reading to him, little Tommy, 2 years old, the little boy that I took care of. I felt like I was one of her own children. And as she would sit there reading back and forth from page to page, putting those words in her mouth and saying them out loud, I said, "Ma'am, how did you learn to do that? How did you learn to put those words in your mouth and speak them out loud? How did you learn to read?" She said, "Son, are you trying to tell me you don't know how to read?" "No, ma'am, I don't know how to read." "Well, we're just going to have to start, aren't we?" And so Miss Sophia, Miss Sofa, I called her, started teaching me the rudiments of reading. I got to the point where I was learning things so well that I could actually sound out the words from the Bible. "The Lord is my shepherd." She was so proud of me that she called her husband in. "Hugh, look what Fred can do." And Hugh came in, he looked at me, and he said, "What can he do?" And I took up the Bible, and I said, "The Lord is my shepherd." And when I looked at him, he had a scowl on his face, and he was coming at me like an angry bull. "You get that book out of your hand." And he grabbed it from me. "Now you get out of here, and don't you ever let me see you doing that again. Don't you ever pick up a book. Now get it." And so I got out of there. But I heard him say to his wife, "Don't you ever teach a slave how to read. It's going to forever unfit him to be a slave. If you teach him how to read, he's going to want to learn how to write. And if he learns how to write, his mind is going to run away with itself. A slave should know only the will of his master and obey that. Besides, if they find out that you've been teaching him how to read, why, I could be fined $200. I could be put in jail. But do you want that to happen to your nice little Christian household?" My ears were aching as I listened to his words echo through the house. If you teach the slave to read, he will forever be unfit to be a slave. I determined in that moment that I would become unfit to be a slave. Miss Sophia, who had been my archangel, who had rescued me from the depravity of ignorance by teaching me the rudiments of reading, she became my archenemy. Within a few months' time, Miss Sophia herself was wondering whether or not I was reading on my own. Her husband had turned her around. You see, Miss Sophia was not born into slavery. She had to be taught about the ignominious logic of slavery. She had to be taught that human beings had to be made ignorant, had to be kept ignorant of everything around them, because it would make them unfit to be slaves. Wonderful logic, is it not? But even though she took a strong arm against teaching me how to read anymore, yelling at me when she thought I was reading, I went outside and I played games with all the young boys in the street. I would produce, they called me Mr. Spelling Bee. I would write words in the dirt. And I said, I know how to spell government. and I would spell it out. And they say, no, that ain't how you spell government. This is how you spell government. I must have played this game maybe hundreds, maybe 1,000 times. And that's how I learned some spelling and some understanding of the words in this language. But my fate would change. I was sent back to the plantation. My master and his brother, they had an argument about the slaves, who owned who and where they were gonna go, because somebody had died and now they had to redistribute the slaves to the different masters out there. So your fate is always at the whim, beckons to the whim of whoever wants to sell you as their property, because that's what you are. You are nothing but property. So I was sent back to the plantation, and the master said, I see that you've been up there in that northern air. It's not totally north, but you can smell that northern air up there, that abolitionist air. And I was wondering what he was talking about, abolitionist air. He says, I ask you to do things for me, do chores, and you don't mind me. And because you don't mind me, I can see that you have become very obstreperous. You're almost unteachable. So I'm going to send you someplace where they're going to teach you how to be a slave. Did you know that there was a university for learning how to be a slave? Yes. He says, I'm going to send you to Covey's farm. And Mr. Covey, you know what they called him? They called him, what did they do? You know, the old-fashioned way of teaching horses how to behave. What did they call teaching horses how to behave? Break them in. You had to break down the will of the horse. This is the same logic that Mr. Covey would use to break down the will of his slaves so that they would become docile, so that they would become slaves. So Mr. Covey was a man they called a snake in the grass. Mr. Covey was a man who beat his slaves almost every day. Mr. Covey was a man who would tell you one thing and do the opposite. He never ever kept his word because he was always trying to keep you off guard. And so consequently, my spirit was broken after 4 or 5 months with Mr. Covey being beat every day for this infringement or that infringement. My soul was starting to decay, so to speak, that bright and shining promise that I had in my eyes for becoming a person full of knowledge. It dissipated inside of me. And on some days of the week, that one day of the week that you would have for rest, that Sunday I would sit on the dock and I would watch the white sails of the ships passing by. And I'd look at those sails passing by and I'd say, well, if only I could be one of those white sails and sailing off into another world. I wanted to die. I wanted to be someplace other than here. Nobody knows the sorrow I was feeling. That week, we were threshing wheat. There were 5 or 6 men. We had a kind of passing the wheat along from one to the other. And I was the first on the line. And I would pass the wheat to him, and he would shave it down and pass it to the other man. We had to keep it going. And all week long, we were working in the hot sun. But by the end of the week, on that Friday, the hot sun was boiling. It was about 120 degrees, and I was picking it up, and my head was starting to spin. I was picking it up, and my head was starting to spin. I was picking it up, and it spun so much that I fell to the ground. I was dizzy. I was nauseous. I was starting to freeze inside. How could it be 120 degrees and I'm sweating from the cold? They say, oh, Fred is sick. And I crawled over into the shade of a tree. And my stomach was retching, but nothing would come up. And I was still shivering so much so that sweat was bouncing off of me from the cold. And Covey said, what's wrong? Why is the work not going on? He said, Fred is sick. You see him over there? And he come over to me and said, get up. Get yourself up. And I tried to look up at him, and I retched again. But all he did was kick me in the stomach. Get up, I said. Get up, get up, get up. We got to get this work going. Since I didn't get up, he gave me one nice glancing blow right to the side of my head, and it opened up like a spigot of blood. It was a good thing I had thick hair at the time, because it made the hair very enmeshed, made the blood enmeshed in my hair. And so, as he was walking away, I could feel the hot blood coming out of me. But it was almost like a blessing in disguise, because the hot blood inside of me made my body less agitated and made my mind very calm. And I knew one thing was happening here. I might have been sick, but now I know that I might die if this man keeps trying to kick me and try to make me work. And so I did get up, and I made my way into the bushes away from him. And he turned around and just sucked his teeth, because he knew that either I was going to die in those bushes or I was going to come crawling back to have him feed me. I kept going. I knew I had to find my master. I was crawling through the swamps. I was crawling everywhere I could find to hold on to this bit of life that was inside of me. I was going here for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours, and when I finally got to my master's plantation, I came out of the swamp area, and I was covered with mud, and there was leeches all over me, and there was blood all hanging down my head, and my master saw me. And you would have thought, well, here is this man looking like he's crazy, like he's been beat to death. But you know what he says to me? What are you doing here? He said, Covey is trying to kill me. Covey ain't gonna kill you, but I will if you don't get yourself back there. Now you can stay here tonight, but you better get yourself back there first thing in the morning. Otherwise, I'm gonna take the lash to you and finish you off. There might have been empty threats, but how did I know? So I was caught between that hard place and that rock. And I got myself cleaned up, got myself fed, and I left that morning. And as I walked and walked, I turned the corner and said, I'm not going to Covey's farm. I'm going someplace where I can sleep in peace. And I found myself a little niche in a meadow, and I lay down, and I went into a very deep sleep. Now when you're in a deep sleep, and the world is troubling your spirit, strange things can happen to you. You can see premonitions of things. I thought I saw a snake crawling itself around my feet and coming up my waist. And I started to scream. And when I jumped up, I realized that there was a man holding my feet. And I started to scream, and he says, don't scream. I found you out here. This is my friend, a man by the name of Sandy. He says, I found you out here because I needed to show you something. He said, I heard about what had happened to you at Covey's farm. I heard that he almost killed you. And I want to show you how to keep yourself from being beat. And he went into his right-hand pocket, and he pulled out this gnarled root system. And he said, this root has kept me from being beat all these years. I keep it in my right-hand pocket, and I'm going to give you this root. And if you keep it in your right-hand pocket, no man will ever put his hands on you. He said, that sounds like superstition to me. I said, he said, look, this root, I kept it alive when I was brought here from the motherland of Africa. This root will keep you alive. It will show you that you are from people who are warriors and who will not let themselves be beat. Take this root. I was held in the spell of his eyes, and I took the root and I put it in my pocket. Now he said, get to Covey's farm. And so I got to Cubby's farm. I walked the 7 or 8 miles with the root in my pocket. It was time of the day that people were going off to Sunday meeting. Cubby saw me walking, and instead of coming at me with a whip, he tipped his hat to me. I said, could that root be working? He's tipping his hat to me. Well, he went off to Sunday meeting, and he come back that evening, all happy with the Lord, they say. You ever seen anybody happy with the Lord? Yeah, their eyes are shining bright. You can feel God taking over their whole frame. And all the slaves were coming back, and everybody was singing. My soul was new when I came out the wilderness. My soul was new when I came out the wilderness. I loved everybody when I came out the wilderness, leaning on the Lord. I said I loved everybody when I came out the wilderness. I loved everybody when I came out the wilderness. I loved everybody when I came out the wilderness, leaning on the Lord. I said my soul was new when I came out the wilderness. My soul was new when I came out the wilderness. My soul was new when I came out the wilderness, leaning on the Lord. Do you think it's true? Do you think that Mr. Covey is leaning on the Lord? Do you think that God has watched over the Spirit and made him renewed? He seemed to be to me. And I knew that maybe because he was leaning on the Lord, that the Lord was telling him that he had to free the slaves. He had to let these people go. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking that that root inside my pocket was magic, and that it was going to make him free the slaves too. And so the next morning, when he come to tell me to go hitch up the horses, early first thing I said, oh yes, he wants to go down to the courthouse, and he's going to get the papers to free us up. And so I was very happy and whistling, hitching up these horses, getting them ready, and rubbing them down, and putting on all of the bridles that they needed. And when he come in and say, okay, I want you to go to the back of the barn, and I want you to take all your clothes, take them off, and I'm going to whip you into 1 inch of your life. And I looked at him and I said, I ain't taking off my clothes. Do you mean to resist me? I'm not taking off my clothes. And he comes charging at me. He had these ropes coming at me. And as he was coming at me, it looks like he was going to lasso me. But before he could lasso me, stronger than I thought I was, my arms came out like a mule kick and grabbed him around the throat like this. And I could see the energy and strength coming out of his body because I was holding him as tight as a vice. Do you mean to resist? Help me, he started calling. Help me, Robert. My hands were so tight, I didn't believe I could hold a person that tight. And Robert come in. He was the kind of slave who didn't like to work very hard. So when he looked at me, he says, what you want me to do? Get this man off of me. Get this man off of me. Robert said, I wasn't hired to help you beat on nobody. Robert ran out. George! And George come in. He says, I'll get him off you. I'll get him off you. But George was a kind of stout man, but he didn't realize that not only did I have a strong arms, but I had a strong knee. And as he come to grab me, my knee met his waist so hard that it knocked the wind out of me. And George went rolling over. like a ball that had been deflated. There was only one person that he could call now, and that was Caroline. She was the woman who cooked on the plantation, and Caroline was indeed a very stout and very strong woman. I think Caroline could have picked me up by my collar like this and threw me into the river with just one flick of her wrist. But Caroline, when she walked in, she sized up the situation, and she looked at me and she looked at him, and she said, "What you want me to do, boss?" "Get this boy off of me!" For some reason, Caroline had a little smirk on her face, and she just said, "I ain't doing nothing." So now, it was just me and Cubby. For 2 hours, we wrestled on the floor. There was blood coming out of his neck, but there was no blood in mine. And after 2 hours of wrestling, he was winded. I don't think I was winded. And he said, "I would have beat you better if you hadn't resisted so much." The truth is, he hadn't beat me at all. I had controlled the fight the entire time. And as he looked at me with that look in his face, I looked at him with that look in my face. And we both knew that there would never be a fight again between us. Because I realized that I would never let somebody beat me until my spirit was broken. That I would fight and resist at all costs. And he knew that when a man's spirit was that high, it would take 10 men to get him down. And so Mr. Covey never bothered me again. And I could feel my soul and my manhood coming back to me. The same manhood that he tried to beat out of me. And you wonder why Mr. Covey never had me put in jail? Because if they found out that I had beat him, a 16-year-old boy, had beat him at his game, they would have stopped bringing him any more business. So he was protecting his interest, and he protected me from the slave system. But my fate would change, and my story would end that I'm telling you, because I was sent back to Baltimore to the master who was teaching me how to be a good ship cabinet maker. And this man would have me bring in money from whatever source I could get it and give it to him. But the Irishman down in the docks told me that I should get myself on the Underground Railroad and that I should escape to slavery, escape from slavery to the freedom of the North. And that's exactly what I did. I got myself a sailor's uniform and some papers, and I got on a boat, and I got on a train, and I went to the north up here in the Boston area, and that was in 1838. I started a family, had 3 children in 3 years. I worked on the docks in Bedford. In 1841, I went to the first big abolitionist meeting that they ever had out in Nantucket. I went there, and it was 300 strong people sitting in that one place. And William Lloyd Garrison, the man who was the leader of this new movement to liberate the slaves, he talked with such eloquence and such fire. I was so inspired by Mr. William Lloyd Garrison. And then he looks out at me in the audience and said, "You, sir, you want to tell the people about your life in slavery?" Me? Yes, you. And I came up in front of the audience. I went behind the pulpit, and I began to speak, just like I'm speaking to you today. I told them of the miseries of slavery and of its depredations. At the end of my speech, I said, there's one thing in my life that I shall never, ever be able to forgive, and that's the fact that my grandma Betsy, when she was an older woman, a woman who all her life had worked for the plantations, a woman who, as a young girl herself, had put the master's babies up to her own breasts to feed them milk so that they could live. That woman, when she was an older woman who was turning blind, was put out into a little shack by herself with nobody to help her and nobody to take care of her. This was a sin before God. She was treated like she was garbage. And Mr. William Lloyd Garrison, he jumped up and said, are we going to let this man or these people be treated like garbage? And 300 strong, they said, no, no, no. Are we going to let him speak out against slavery and turn the tide against this inhumanity? And 300 strong, they cried, yes, yes. And at that moment, I knew what I had to become. A man who would speak out vehemently against the degradation of slavery. I, Frederick Douglass, I was a slave, but I escaped to the freedom of the North. And because I am a man, not a quarter of a man, but a whole man, fully endowed with life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness, because I am a man, I shall always be and forever be an abolitionist. Thank you very much.